José, a simple cook, never imagined his life would take such an unpredictable turn. When his destiny intersected with that of the cartels that dominated Jalisco, he found himself forced into a dangerous game. The city, gripped by fear and corruption, seemed a hopeless place until José decided it was time to act. But what happens when an ordinary man challenges an empire of violence? Prepare for a journey of twists and turns, courage and redemption. If you're curious to see how this story unfolds and what happens to Joseph, subscribe to our channel right now. Don't miss any detail of this amazing story and share your thoughts on what you would do if you were in Joseph's place. Let's embark on this journey together. The cook, José Ramos, was a simple man. At 45, he had dedicated his life to cooking, and his small restaurant, El Sabor de la Abuela, was a modest but beloved spot in the small town of Jalisco, Mexico. His day began early, preparing tacos, enchiladas, and other traditional dishes, always with a smile on his face. He was content with his simple life, and the peace of his restaurant was his greatest achievement. However, José carried a secret. He was not just a cook. His family was connected to a world of shadows and violence, a world José preferred to keep distant from his daily reality. On the other side of the city, the CJNG Cartel ruled ruthlessly. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, commanded by ruthless figures, controlled drug trafficking and extortion, spreading terror among the locals. One of these men was El Chacal, the right-hand man of the cartel leader and responsible for overseeing operations in the Jalisco region. El Chacal was known for his cruelty. There were no limits to what he would do in the name of power and control. José's destiny and that of the cartel were about to intertwine in a way he could never have imagined. José never had any interest in getting involved with the cartel. He knew about the violence around him, but always maintained an indifferent attitude, trying to live his life peacefully. That is, until a group of cartel members entered his restaurant. José was at the cash register, counting the day's money, when the group, composed of 3 men and a woman, entered. They were there to collect protection money, a sum that all merchants in the region had to pay to the cartel in exchange for security. Without hesitation, José stood up and went to the counter, where he began arguing with the men, trying to reason why he didn't have to pay that amount, since José's restaurant had never been threatened. That's when one of the men, one of El Chacal's most brutal henchmen, looked at him with disdain and, without a word, gave José a hard shove, knocking him to the ground. "You don't know who you're dealing with, old man. Just fry potatoes and keep your mouth shut." That's what the henchman said, mocking Joseph. The humiliation was more than he could bear. The respect he had for his profession and his dignity was trampled in that moment. But what he didn't know was that the cartel had no idea of José's true identity. He wasn't just a simple cook at a small restaurant. He was related to someone much more powerful, someone within the cartel itself. José knew that if he did something impulsive, he could put his life and his family's life at risk. But he also knew that the cartel was playing with fire, without knowing who he really was. The seemingly submissive cook possessed a secret link to the leader of one of the cartel's most powerful factions, someone with whom he shared a distant but crucial blood tie. After the humiliation, Joseph didn't react. Not at that moment. He simply stood up, brushed the dust off his clothes, and with a discreet smile said, "Of course, sir, I'll fry potatoes, but there's something you need to know. This isn't going to stay like this." The threat wasn't in the words. It was in the look. Something that no one there could understand at that moment. The city of Jalisco, with its narrow streets and bustling markets, seemed a peaceful place, but in the shadows, cartel violence was slowly eroding the foundations of society. José was not a man of great ambition. He grew up in a small rural village where life was hard, but people helped each other. His grandmother, who taught him to cook, always said that food had the power to unite people. José believed this with all his heart. The small restaurant he ran reflected this simple and honest philosophy. El Sabor de la Abuela wasn't luxurious. The decor was simple, with a wall covered in old family photos. The menu was limited but always fresh, made with local ingredients. José preferred it that way, few but good dishes. He knew that the value of a good meal lay in the love and dedication he put into each dish. People came for the food, but also for the welcoming atmosphere. It was a refuge for those who, like him, wanted to escape the violence that was taking over the city. Despite the simplicity of his restaurant, José had contacts that no one in Jalisco would imagine. The truth is that he was the nephew of Javier El Lobo, one of the most feared men in the CJNG Cartel. Javier, who was not just a member of the cartel, but one of the commanders who operated directly under El Chacal's orders, was a figure of power and respect. José never wanted to be part of that world, but the truth was always there, hidden, like a time bomb about to explode. José had always avoided involving his family in his dealings with the cartel. He believed he could live his life without the shadow of violence and crime. However, the events of a simple day at the restaurant were about to bring to light a truth he could no longer hide. On the other hand, the CJNG cartel dominated the region with absolute power, manipulating drug trafficking and other illicit businesses. El Chacal, the central figure of the cartel, was a cold and calculating man. His reputation for ruthlessness made him almost invincible, but his biggest mistake was underestimating José's determination. El Chacal and his men controlled everything in the city. From small shopkeepers to large business owners, everyone had to pay the protection tax imposed by the cartel, an extortion disguised as security, and anyone who dared not to pay would face terrible consequences. That day, when José refused to pay the demanded amount, the cartel not only publicly disrespected him, but made a fatal mistake. The insult to the cook was not only an affront to his dignity, but also to his family. José knew this. He knew that deep down, the cartel had no idea what was about to happen. José, though he seemed a calm and peaceful man, had always known that violence was lurking nearby. His uncle, Javier El Lobo, had always tried to convince him to join the cartel, offering him a prominent position. But José always refused, trying to distance himself from that dark world. He believed that life could be different, that things could improve. However, with the cartel's disrespect at his restaurant, he no longer had a choice. The cook knew he needed to act shrewdly. If he went after the cartel directly, he would probably die without anyone noticing. But behind his apparent humility, he had a plan, and the cartel would be caught off guard. José wasn't a violent man, but when his honor was challenged, he knew he could no longer avoid conflict. It was time to play their game, but with his own rules. After the public humiliation at El Sabor de la Abuela, José became a different man. Although he seemed like the same friendly cook everyone knew, something had changed inside him. He knew he needed to act cautiously, as any wrong move could mean his death. His family's secret, his connection to Javier El Lobo, would need to be used strategically. In the following days, José began to gather information. He started observing the cartel members more closely, paying attention to details that went unnoticed by ordinary people. He knew that the cartel was not only violent, but also greedy and full of secrets. The cook began to realize that many of El Chacal's henchmen had weaknesses, and José had the advantage of knowing the city and its streets like no one else. He began making small moves: a dinner for one of the oldest henchmen, a drink offered to another on a party night. Little by little, José began to plant seeds of trust. He knew that in time, these men would begin to trust him, and when the moment was right, he could use them to his advantage. Meanwhile, El Chacal, oblivious to what was happening, intensified his presence in the city. His men began to become more aggressive, demanding more money from merchants and intimidating the local population. José, realizing that the cartel was tightening its grip on his city, knew that the moment to act was drawing ever closer. One day, while Jose was at the market buying ingredients for lunch, one of his old friends, now involved with the cartel, approached him. "Jose," he said in a low voice, "the jackal is on a dangerous path. He's not satisfied with what he's done. His men want more." Jose was silent for a moment, observing his friend's face. He knew this was further proof that the cartel was becoming increasingly enraged, and that soon he would have to act. Jose, still trying to keep up appearances, invited the same friend to dinner at his home, out of the reach of the cartel's watchful eyes. The conversation was brief but crucial. Jose knew that tensions were rising and that the cartel was about to take another aggressive step. At that dinner, Jose subtly suggested that his friend seek protection within his own family, a clever strategy to gain the trust of the cartel members. Meanwhile, Jose made an unexpected move. He began cultivating a relationship with one of El Chacal's closest henchmen, a man named Ricardo, who was seen as loyal to the end. Ricardo had a brother who lived in the city, and Jose knew he could use this to his advantage. Jose began to act discreetly, forging a bond of friendship with Ricardo without ever revealing his true intentions. He knew that a simple mistake, a small slip-up by El Chacal or his men, could be the key to the revenge he planned. The situation grew increasingly tense. Each day, the cartel became more aggressive, more demanding, the threats became more frequent, and Jose realized he couldn't wait much longer to put his plan into action. He knew a battle of wits was about to begin, and he was prepared to use his cunning against the cartel's power. One of the tensest moments occurred when Jose heard rumors that El Chacal was planning a major offensive against the city, intending to take complete control of local businesses. Chaos was about to unfold, and this would create the perfect scenario for Jose to act. He now needed an opportunity to make El Chacal fall into his own trap. Jose knew he had a short window of time before the situation became untenable. He decided that the first move would be a small espionage operation. With the help of his new allies, he began observing the movements of El Chacal and his henchmen, especially Ricardo, who was more open to conversation after Jose's pleasantries. He became a key piece in Jose's plans, although he didn't know it yet. At that moment, Jose felt the tension in the city growing, but he knew he was closer to achieving his goal than he had ever imagined. The confrontation with the cartel was about to become inevitable, and now he was prepared to face the consequences of his choices. As Jose grew closer to Ricardo, El Chacal's henchman, he knew he could use this newly formed friendship to more effectively target the cartel. Ricardo was a man of few words, but with an unwavering sense of loyalty, something Jose knew he could manipulate. The cook began sharing stories about his simple life and his hardships, trying to elicit Ricardo's empathy. The henchman, in turn, began to open up, talking about his own family and his own dilemmas within the cartel. Jose knew that Ricardo's vulnerability could be the key to his manipulation. Over several weeks, he had been gradually sowing doubts in the henchman's mind, questioning the value of his loyalty to El Chacal. When Ricardo first mentioned that he had begun to question his boss's orders, Jose knew that the right moment to act was approaching. One evening, while they were at Jose's restaurant, the cook prepared a special dish, something that Ricardo would find impossible to resist. During dinner, Jose casually asked a question. "Have you ever thought, Ricardo, if all of our lives could be different, if we distanced ourselves from the wrong things?" Ricardo remained silent for a moment before letting out a deep sigh, as if finally allowing his thoughts to overwhelm him. He was tired, but he still didn't know what to do with the information Jose was planting in his mind. Jose knew he should continue sowing doubt, but he was also aware that Ricardo's loyalty to his family and the cartel could be a double-edged sword. While Jose maneuvered behind the scenes, something else was about to happen. Javier, Jose's uncle, El Lobo, finally appeared in town after years of absence. Jose had known that Javier's presence could cause as many problems as benefits, but he had no choice but to accept him back, especially now that the situation was out of control. Javier was not just a member of the cartel, but a feared leader. He always had a different view of power than Jose, believing that violent means were the only way to secure a solid position in life. When Javier arrived in Jalisco, he brought with him an aura of threats and promises of retribution. Jose knew he would have to meet with his uncle, but he didn't know how that would affect his plan. What he didn't expect was that Javier was aware of the tensions that were building and already knew that something was going on. Javier, being as perceptive as Jose, probably had his own plans, which could either help or complicate everything Jose had built up until then. Beyond the issues with the cartel, Jose was facing personal conflicts. He began to question his own choices. Over the years, he had distanced himself from his family, trying to escape the legacy of violence that his uncle Javier represented. But now, with everything that was happening, he found himself more involved than he had ever imagined. What would happen to his own morality? Would he become what he had always avoided? His relationship with the city was also being tested. Many of his friends began to notice changes in Jose's behavior. They saw tension in his eyes, an unease that hadn't been there before. They began to wonder what was really happening to the cook. Some even began to doubt his intentions, and even started to fear what he might be plotting, unaware that he was in the middle of a much more dangerous game. Meanwhile, the cartel itself was beginning to realize that something was wrong. El Chacal's men started paying closer attention to Jose's movements, and he knew that at any moment an investigation could be launched, putting his life at risk. Tensions between Jose and the cartel were growing. El Chacal's men were getting closer to the restaurant, and Jose knew he could no longer afford to be discreet. The city was on the verge of a melting pot, and every move seemed to be monitored. With Javier now in town, Jose was caught between a rock and a hard place. He had a chance to turn the tables, but to do so he would have to deal with his uncle, Ricardo, and, of course, the cartel. Jose needed to act quickly. There was no more time for meticulous planning. He knew that any mistake now could be fatal. The turning point in Jose's story began with a series of events that unfolded unexpectedly. When Javier El Lobo finally appeared in town, he brought not only his intimidating presence, but also new plans to expand the cartel's dominion. Jose knew this meant an escalation of violence, but more than that, it was the moment when he would have to decide whether to continue operating in the shadows or finally confront the power of El Chacal and his uncle. It was on a tense night, while Jose was working at the restaurant, that the real turning point occurred. Ricardo, El Chacal's henchman, appeared unexpectedly. He was nervous, his eyes anxious, and Jose knew something important was happening. Ricardo brought news that El Chacal himself would begin a large-scale operation in the city, eliminating anyone who opposed the cartel. The order was clear. Either the merchants paid double the protection money, or the entire city would face chaos. However, there was more to this visit. Ricardo, his voice trembling, confessed that he knew more about El Chacal's plans than Jose himself had imagined. The henchman revealed that El Chacal was, in fact, preparing a major internal betrayal within the cartel, planning to eliminate leaders he considered threats, including Javier El Lobo, who was about to be ambushed. Ricardo, torn between his loyalty to the cartel and his own feelings of guilt, sought help. Jose then realized that the game was changing radically. His uncle Javier's fate was in El Chacal's hands, and the city could collapse completely. He could no longer hesitate. The situation had reached a point where he needed to act, and now, not only to avenge the humiliation, but to save his family's lives. Jose's dilemma was clear. He could remain in the shadows, waiting for the conflict to resolve itself, or he could take control of the situation and turn the tables on the cartel, helping to bring down El Chacal. He knew that the only chance of success would be with Ricardo's help, but the trust between them was yet to be solidified. Without hesitation, José decided that this would be the decisive moment. With a heavy heart, he made Ricardo an offer, providing him with protection and a future away from the cartel. José's offer was risky, but the only alternative was for Ricardo to join El Chacal's operation, something that, according to the henchman himself, was about to happen. José knew he needed to act fast. He asked Ricardo to pinpoint the exact spot where El Chacal and his men were planning the ambush, a move that could change the course of the war between the cartel and the city. Meanwhile, Javier, who had been informed of El Chacal's operation through his own informants, was beginning to suspect that something was wrong. The city was under constant surveillance, and José himself knew that the situation was about to explode. There was no more room for negotiation. The only chance to defeat El Chacal would be to make him believe that José and Javier were united against him, when in reality they were about to turn against him. José knew he had to play the game with precision. He and Ricardo devised a plan, a risky move that involved deceiving El Chacal and his network of trust. Ricardo would be the bait. José would use the henchman's trust to infiltrate the cartel's operation and, with Javier's help, deliver the final blow. Tensions rose as José and Ricardo began to execute the plan. During the night, in a secret meeting between cartel members, José and Ricardo managed to obtain details about the location and timing of the ambush. They knew that El Chacal and his men were just steps away from launching an attack against Javier. However, the biggest surprise would come when José revealed his true intention. He was doing this not only to save the city, but also to get revenge on the cartel and clear his family's name. On the night of the ambush, when El Chacal's men arrived at the location, they were already prepared for the fight, but instead of a simple elimination operation, they encountered a completely different scenario. José, Javier, and Ricardo were ready to face them, but not in the way they expected. In a masterstroke, José used his deep knowledge of the city and the cartel's weaknesses. As El Chacal prepared to attack, he was surprised by a series of traps and twists that left him vulnerable. Javier, with his strategic skill, had devised a plan to capture El Chacal, while José ensured that the other cartel members were occupied with the distractions he had created. What El Chacal didn't know was that, in trying to eliminate his rival leader, he had just brought an end to his own empire. José and his family had finally taken control. The armed operation against El Chacal and his men was an unexpected success. The cartel, which seemed unbeatable and in total control of the city of Jalisco, was now in ruins. When El Chacal was captured and taken to a safe haven, the city breathed a sigh of relief, but the impact on José's life and his family was immense. The cook, who until then had seen himself as someone detached from the world of crime and violence, was now at the center of it all. Javier, with his experience in the cartel, took control of the aftermath operation, eliminating the last forces loyal to El Chacal. But at the same time, he began to realize that José's victory was not just a matter of revenge, but of survival, both for the city and for his family. José had done more than destabilize the cartel. He had shown that even the simplest people could stand up to power. However, this victory came at a price. After the confrontation, José spent a long time alone, reflecting on what had happened. He knew things would never be the same. Despite the feeling of satisfied revenge, he couldn't shake the weight of his choices. The blood spilled in the fight for control of the city was now on his hands. Even if it had been a response to humiliation, the violence would never cease to haunt him. José also knew that although the cartel was dismantled, the scars it had left on the city would be permanent. The trust of the people he trusted was broken. Friends began to distance themselves from him, fearing the shadow of the cartel that now surrounded them. Even if he had defeated El Chacal, he could not erase the fact that to do so, he had to ally himself with Javier and, consequently, with the cartel's methods. What weighed most heavily on José was Javier's arrival in town, with his own ambitions for control. His uncle, although he had helped orchestrate El Chacal's downfall, didn't hide his desire to use his newfound power for his own ends. Javier wanted to take complete control, not only of the city, but also of the drug trade and local corruption. He began to question whether José, with all his apparent morality, would truly accept continuing down this path, or whether he would choose a life away from violence. José found himself at a crossroads. He had just brought down an empire of violence, but now he knew his victory might be short-lived. The same loyalty his uncle had shown to the cartel, he now wanted José to follow, something that wasn't easy to accept. José knew he couldn't allow Javier to take control of the city without resistance. The internal struggle between protecting his morality and the pressure of his own blood was becoming unbearable. The conflict between José and Javier was inevitable. The city of Jalisco, though free from El Chacal, was not free from the threat of his uncle. José began to realize that he could no longer live on the tightrope. He had to make a choice, allow Javier to maintain control, or fight for the city and the legacy of his grandmother, for which he had always worked to protect the peace. The decision came on a somber afternoon when Javier confronted José in his restaurant. His uncle, with his merciless gaze, questioned José's actions, accusing him of weakening the family by opposing absolute control. It was the moment when José would have to choose between his blood loyalty and his own vision of justice. "Did you betray me, nephew?" Javier said with a low laugh, his voice sharp. "What more do you want? This city is ours now." Joseph, with a firm look, replied, "This city isn't ours, uncle. I'm not you. I'm not a violent man. I won't let you destroy what's left of my life." José's words echoed in Javier's mind, but his uncle was not a man to back down easily. He knew that now there would be no more easy way out. José could be a threat to him. The old power which had withstood everything was now in danger of being dismantled by his own nephew. What followed was a silent but inevitable confrontation. José didn't attack Javier directly, but he began to undermine his operations, using the contacts he still had in the city and exposing Javier's corrupt practices to the public. Gradually, Javier lost the support of his allies, and the city that had once trembled under the cartel's yoke now rose up, albeit scarred. José had no choice but to confront his uncle, but he knew that in doing so, he would have to become what he had always feared, part of the world he so hated. But unlike Javier, he sought a new path for the city, without the weight of violence and corruption. In the end, José became the new leader, but not in the same way as El Chacal or Javier. He would be someone who would finally decide the city's fate, without having to follow the same rules of the game. The tension hanging over Jalisco reached its peak. Joseph finally found himself facing the ultimate test of his journey. Control of the city was at stake, and the battle would not be fought only with weapons, but also with hearts and minds. He knew the choice was before him, to be the man of his family or to be the leader of the city. The great confrontation began unexpectedly. Javier, in his quest for absolute power, orchestrated one last offensive. He had infiltrated the local forces, corrupting even some police officers, and planned an offensive to seize control of the city once and for all, creating a new era of violence and impunity. The plan was simple: create widespread chaos, and during that chaos, destroy José's resistance. However, José was one step ahead. He knew of Javier's plans through Ricardo, who, despite his loyalty to José, had friends within his uncle's operation. Ricardo's words echoed in José's mind. "Confrontation will be inevitable, but you can choose how it will happen." Jose, now aware that violence could no longer be the answer, decided to confront his uncle and end the war for the city once and for all. He would not rely on more weapons, more dirty tricks or manipulations. He counted on the power of truth and the strength of his community. Jose, with his strategic vision, initiated a series of secret meetings with local leaders, those who had survived the cartel's reign and who now saw in him a hope. He wanted not only to defeat Javier physically, but to destroy the foundation of power that had sustained him for years: corruption, fear, and manipulation. Jose met with local businessmen, community authorities, and even former allies of Javier who were willing to rebel. The idea was simple but risky. Jose planned a public event that would involve Javier appearing before the people of Jalisco, where he would confront him with evidence of his transgressions. Jose knew that if successful, he could expose his uncle and end the cartel's era of dominance without the need for more deaths. On the day of the event, the city was divided. While Javier's followers prepared for a major offensive, Jose gathered his allies behind the scenes. When Javier arrived, with his arrogant demeanor and unwavering confidence, he had no idea that the city's main stage would be where his downfall would begin. In the central square of Jalisco, with the city full of citizens who had lived for years under the tyranny of Javier and El Chacal, Jose climbed onto the stage. His eyes were fixed on his uncle's face, who observed everything with a look of disdain. Javier was in his typical imposing posture, but Jose knew that his sense of security was about to crumble. "Today, you will all see the true face of the man who controlled Jalisco for years," Jose announced it, his voice firm and sharp, but without a tone of revenge. He knew that this was an opportunity for redemption for his city, not a simple act of revenge. He then brought to light documents, recordings, and accounts that exposed Javier's dirty dealings, his involvement in drug trafficking, the corruption of officials and businessmen, the murders he had ordered, and the extortion he had imposed on the city. He not only destroyed Javier's image, but also offered an alternative, a new local government based on transparency and the rebuilding of the foundations of a just community. Javier's gaze, which had initially been full of confidence, began to waver. He tried to defend himself, but the truth was there, exposed before everyone. The public, who had previously feared his power, now looked at him with revulsion. The reaction was immediate. The men loyal to Javier began to disperse, some of them already beginning to realize that the reign of terror was coming to an end. Javier, with no other option, tried to resort to violence, but his allies were at a disadvantage. The city was already against him, and he had been abandoned by those who had previously feared him. At the height of the tension, when it seemed that the fighting might resume, a strategic move by Jose and his allies sealed Javier's defeat. Jose not only avoided a bloody confrontation, but also managed to arrest Javier and bring him to justice. The local police officers, who had previously been corrupt, were now on Jose's side, and with their help, Javier was finally apprehended. What followed was a wave of restoration. With the power of El Chacal and Javier destroyed, the city of Jalisco began to rebuild. Jose did not seize control in an authoritarian way, but became the symbol of a new leadership. He established a local government committed to transparency, justice, and a return to the path of peace. Jose's victory was not just over violence and the cartel, but over the ability of an ordinary person, armed with courage and truth, to challenge the shadows and bring to light what was hidden. He became the leader Jalisco needed, not through the force of arms, but through the strength of his vision. The city of Jalisco, which had lived under the control of cartels, fear, and violence, was now beginning to breathe differently. The eyes of its citizens were opening to a more just and transparent future. The fall of El Chacal and Javier represented the end of an era of terror and corruption, but also the birth of a new hope for the community. Jose was not the type of leader who assumed absolute control, but he became the central figure of a movement that restored order, not through force, but by building a solid foundation of trust and transparency. He who had once been a simple cook was now a symbol of resistance and renewal. Despite the victory, José felt there was still much work to be done. He knew that the wounds inflicted by years of oppression would not heal overnight. The people of Jalisco were beginning to regain confidence in local institutions, but the process would be gradual. For José, the true victory lay not only in the defeat of Javier and the cartel, but in the ability to unite the city for a new beginning. José reflected on his journey and the price he had paid for his decision. Deep down, he knew his transformation had been painful, but necessary. He had had to deal with the loss of friends, the distrust of many, and above all, the internal struggle between his morality and the reality of a ruthless world. However, he had risen to the occasion, not succumbing to the temptation of power or blind revenge. José was a man of principle who, in the end, chose truth and justice over his own ego. In a conversation with Ricardo, the henchman who had helped him take down the cartel, José commented, "I'm no longer the town cook. I'm something different now, but I won't forget where I came from, nor what we did here." Ricardo, now a trusted ally, looked at José with a discreet smile. "What we've done here is more than anyone could have imagined. Now it's time to build something better." José knew this was only the beginning. The city was still recovering, and he had no illusions that change would be simple, but at least the direction was clear. He had chosen to follow a path of peace, justice, and reconstruction. With the fall of the cartel and Javier's arrest, the city began a process of transformation. José and his allies started implementing reforms that allowed justice to be restored and corruption to be gradually eradicated. The city was divided into areas of security and prosperity, with local commerce and businesses being protected by a network of honest leaders. What was once a place of fear was now becoming a symbol of resilience and reconstruction. José, though he did not seek the title of leader, found himself at the center of a movement that would bring a more promising future for all. He was not the traditional hero, but an ordinary man who stood up against oppression with courage and a sincere desire to see his city prosper. The road ahead would not be easy, but Joseph knew he had something more valuable than any power: the trust of his people, the strength of his own morality, and the certainty that, in the end, he had done the right thing. Jalisco, now under reconstruction, was beginning to prosper again, free from the clutches of the cartel. José, with his past of struggle and sacrifice, watched the city flourish with a sense of accomplishment. He sought neither glory nor recognition, but knew that his journey had transformed the city forever. Ricardo, his loyal ally, now worked with him to ensure that the legacy of justice and peace would be perpetuated. José looked to the horizon, grateful for the opportunity to change the future, but aware that as long as there were challenges, his struggle would never truly end. Joseph's story is an example of courage, determination, and above all, the fight for justice. If you were inspired by his journey and want to see more stories of overcoming and change, subscribe to our channel. Share your reflections in the comments and tell us, what would you do in Joseph's place? What does it mean to you to fight for a better future, even against all odds? Let's continue together on this journey of transformation. Don't miss the next episodes, because the story of resistance and redemption is far from over.